This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It's the new age, new era, new year, all things brand new, but the same old game still running it. That's right, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of The Baseline NBA Podcast, welcoming you and yours to this upcoming new year, 2017, upon us, and such good things to talk about in this edition of the Baseline NBA Podcast. You know, I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Dime contributor, former Dime contributor. See, out with the old man, in with the new. ShawSports.net is where it's at. That's who's running things. My man, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Mr. Warren Shaw. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Welcome to the 2017, man.
Well, thank you to you, sir, and salute to all the fans listeners of the NBA Baseline. Happy New Year's. Hope everybody was safe over the New Year's holiday and enjoyed themselves. But we got a lot of basketball business to get into. This is a jam-packed show. Lots of great conversation and content from two amazing guests to kick off the new year, man. What more could you ask for?
Yeah, man, it's just going to be an awesome show that we have lined up for you today. In a little bit, we will have our man, Leo Beas from Cowbell Kingdom, in the heart of it, inside the madness. He's going to talk Kings basketball. And yes, as my man Shaw has alluded to, he was there. He witnessed the tirade of the Boogie. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and some other things happening with the Kings. And in just a little sec, we got our man from the DriveAndDish Podcast, Kevin Rafuse, our brother, man. It's been so long since we've had him on here. He's going to help us break down New Year's resolutions, what we want the NBA to show us for the 2017. So with all that being said, we welcome you and yours to our old listeners and some of our new listeners to the Baseline NBA Podcast. You know how to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major handles, also available on Instagram, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, also available on Google Music and the Roku channel. So download any of these platforms to get access to the latest shows and also the archive shows of the Baseline NBA Podcast. We also want to send a big shout out to our guy Freeman and Fox, the Sports Brothers down there in South Florida, simulcasting our podcast. These guys love talking South Florida sports, but more importantly, they love featuring us when we discuss the hot button topics of the NBA. So shout outs to those guys, and be sure to check out the Sports Brothers. They're available on all the major platforms as well too. They do it each and every single day, Monday through Friday. So without further ado, you know how we roll. You know how this goes. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA Podcast. And man, I love it when we are able to bring in the new year properly. And the best way to do that is getting probably one of the best personalities that is on target, doing his thing lovely. 1/3 of one of the most dynamic podcasts rolling out right now, the DriveAndDish Podcast. Our man, Kevin Rafuse, via location out in Philly. What's going on, Big Kev?
You guys are very kind right now. We appreciate that. And I got to say, it is an honor to be back on with you guys, because I'm going to tell a little history for everyone who isn't aware of this. The DriveAndDish Podcast, we're going on, I think we're hitting 3 years in February since Tim, Justin, and I got it started. And our first guest ever on the show were you and Warren. It was great. You were our first cross promo. You guys got on the bandwagon early, and it's been fun watching the growth of the Baseline, watching the growth of our podcast, and it's just great to be back on. I love talking shop with you guys.
Yeah, man. Listen, we can't be doing this thing where we were talking about everything in basketball happened in 2016, and we all did not have a cipher about that. I'm a little hurt by that. We need to make sure that does not happen again, man.
Hey, New Year 2017, man. I think 2016 across the board was a pretty bad one for all of us. So I think we're just going to file that in the bad category, and we're all going to do better in 2017. But yeah, definitely, man. I mean, we got to get after it again. Baseline DriveAndDish NBA Podcast. The people are calling for it.
Oh yeah, I no question. I mean, I already got people ready to hang the noose around my neck. So that's on me. Shaw can lay in the cut real quiet, and keep it all PR, but this one's on me. So we're gonna handle that for 2017. And speaking of resolutions, so we went ahead and got our resolutions within the podcasting community out of the way. But for our segment here in the breakdown, it's the resolutions that we'd like to see take place for the NBA. In other words, all the NBA players, Adam Silver, and maybe even NBA fans, we need to do right. So we're going to help them get this kick started, Kevin. We had to bring you on because we felt like New Year's resolutions are an absolute, and we needed to kick off the NBA season right, especially after what we've already seen in this past offseason and almost the first half of this NBA season. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to you, man. And I want you to start us off with what type of New Year's resolutions would you like to see take precedent for this upcoming rest of the NBA season for 2017?
All right, so first one, I'm going to be a little bit of a homer here. I got to get my process talk off right away. But I'm not going to just focus on the Sixers because there's another team, Denver Nuggets, who I think have a very similar problem right now. And the Sixers and the Nuggets have three talented big men, Joel Embiid, Jahlil Okafor, and Nerlens Noel for the Sixers, Jokic, Nurkic, and Fareed for the Nuggets. And it is not working on either end. And both of these teams, they're young, they're upcoming, there's a lot of talent there, but that's one part that it seems like it's blocking them from taking that next step a little bit. So first resolution for me is these teams have got to clear the logjam. Now, if you're the Sixers, it looks like it's going to be Nerlens Noel. I personally don't agree with that at all. I think Jahlil Okafor, every statistic shows that we are worse off with him on the floor, but it seems like, the tidings and the leaves have kind of made it seem that Nerlens Noel is out. On the Nuggets side, they're kind of going with the same thing, almost a similar situation. Like Embiid, it seems to be that Denver's going to go with Jokic. He's going to be the guy, which I think is the right call. Nurkic hasn't been getting as much playing time recently, at the expense of, or Kenneth Fareed is getting that time, but it seems like he needs to be the guy that goes. Regardless, though, a lot of young talent here. We want to see these teams take the next step sooner than later. So, one of these big guys needs to be moved because it's just hurting everybody's development right now.
Yeah, well, I like especially the conversation about both teams, but even more so to Denver, because as we record, as we're doing our show right now, just read a blurb that Nurkic is now upset with his role. He was starting to begin the year, and that was at the deficit of Jokic, who's obviously a better player and more skilled, can do more, great passer as a big man as well too. And I'm just trying to figure out what's going to happen in that Denver situation. They moved Joffrey Laverne, to begin the year to try to clear up some of that space. But in a NBA now where everybody knows that you need to be playing stretch fours and things like that too, having four traditional big men, if you will, just wasn't the way to go. And yeah, something's definitely going to happen in Denver with Nurkic. And then regarding the Philadelphia 76ers, man, I'm kind of with you. And I don't know if I'm listening to a lot of different media and a lot of different podcasts and shows out there too, but the arrow is definitely pointing down on Jahlil Okafor. So it's funny that, he's the one where I guess because Noel has been so boisterous in terms of wanting to get out or saying that this can't work. But Noel is the one that's really being shopped. So it'll be interesting to see if they do an about face in some way, shape, or form. But it appears Brett Brown hates the guy. He hates Noel. So I don't know if that can even happen, where Okafor is the one to go. But it'll be interesting to see because Noel can really, really help a lot of teams out there, especially defensively and rebounding.
Yeah, trust the process, but not really feeling the progress. I mean, that's the sentiment for the big man right now if you're in Philly or if you're in Denver, Kevin. And it's interesting to me because I don't know what the problem is in stockpiling up all these big men, because most of these guys are unfortunately one-dimensional players. So unless you actually have the personnel that is going to invest the time to get these guys to play at the level that we are now seeing the trend of, the swing big man, the 4-5 type player, the guy that can stretch the floor. I mean, all of these guys are going to be developmental projects. The one on the back end of it, more so out of all the people you mentioned, Kevin, is Kenneth Fareed. Because while this guy is an energy guy, he's been absolutely stagnant with the growth of his offensive game. But I guarantee you, if you put him to another basketball team that needs a plug and play, someone like a Bismack Biyombo was to the Toronto Raptors last year to help them make the runs that they were making and even help get 2 games out of that Eastern Conference Finals against the Cleveland Cavaliers, I just think that you would definitely get something back for him. But holding these guys out and flip-flopping the minutes is not doing any service for these players, and more so it's not doing any service for the organizations, because it still makes it seem like the organization does not have a definitive path about what they want to do with this team moving forward, with their teams moving forward.
Well, and it makes you negotiate too, like you said, from a position of weakness. Other teams around the league see the Sixers and they see the Nuggets and they see, the longer this goes on both sides, the situation begins to deteriorate. Shaw mentioned Jurkic speaking out for the first time. We've obviously seen the Nerlens Noel comments. And, it's not – you want to get value for these guys because, like you said, even the worst of these guys, regardless of how you feel about it, still can bring value elsewhere. All 6 of these guys that we mentioned are extremely talented. Kenneth Faried, Cal, I think you nailed it. He just hasn't really developed. Still a great energy guy off the bench, but as we become a more shooting-friendly league, Kenneth Faried isn't a guy that exactly stretches the floor, but that's not to say he can't come in off the bench and give you quality minutes. I think there's going to be worries about that contract, but also with the new CBA and everything just going through the roof, it makes it a little bit better. I'm curious to see what type of value they could get back for Reed or what value the Sixers could get back in the trade. But, as we get into 2017, the longer this goes, the weaker the position's going to get. The trade deadline is going to be creeping up on us sooner than later. I know there were a lot of rumors around draft night. People were trying to get both of those situations cleared up then. It didn't happen. But it's just the longer it goes on, you want to begin to put, like you said, it's got to turn into progress on both sides. All this young talent is great, but you wanted to see it take the next step and begin to look like the contenders that both of these teams are trying to be in the next few years. And, the longer this goes on, it's only going to hurt everybody. It's taking minutes away, and it makes the job just more difficult for the coaches, for Mike Malone, for Brett Brown. You have to try to figure out all these guys playing time. And, can you really show them off getting 20 minutes a night? That's a question that they're going to have to answer. But, it seems essential that both of these logjams got to get cleared up right away.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our 2017 New Year's resolutions with our featured guest, Kevin Rafuse, 1/3 of the Drive and Dish podcast. Be sure to check those guys out. They are living large and in charge, discussing all of the great topics that are happening right now in the NBA. All right, Kevin, hit us up with the next resolution that you got on slate for us, man.
All right, so the next one I got, number 2, and this is one that kind of came up recently, but we've seen LeBron and we've seen Kevin Durant both speak about it in the aftermath of that incredible Christmas Day game between the Cavs and the Warriors. And that is, I think the NBA needs to get rid of the 2-minute reports. And I get the logic behind why they have them. Late game situations, you want as much transparency as possible. You want to make sure everybody's got it right. We see more instant replay coming throughout the league. So I think, everybody wants to get the call right. But the fact of the matter is NBA refereeing is extremely subjective. It's always going to be subjective no matter what you do. There's no clear X's and O's here and just to fix a solution. And like LeBron and Kevin Durant said, I think they really hit it on the head. NBA refereeing is one of the most thankless jobs out there. You do a great job and call a great game every night. You just basically walk off the court and go home, but everybody notices an egregious call, and it's something that, can get thousands and thousands of people riled up. And, I think the refs have a really tough job. I think everybody knows the degree of difficulty it is being an NBA ref and all just the heat that you get. I mean, all you do is basically take heat from coaches, from players, from fans, from everybody. And I think the 2-minute report is just kind of doing a disservice at this point. These guys already have a tough job. And now come 2 minutes, knowing these reports are going to come out, knowing the calls are going to, be scrutinized every time. Maybe it makes them swallow their whistles, or in a worst case scenario, it makes them get whistle happy. And at that point, we don't want the final 2 minutes of a basketball game to just turn into a free throw shooting contest. It's not good for the product. I understand on that game, the Warriors fans were upset. Do I think Richard Jefferson tripped Kevin Durant a little bit? Absolutely. But is anybody going to make that call? No. And if we really want to get into it, you could call fouls on any given NBA play. But just nobody wants to watch that. We want to watch these guys play at the highest level. And I think throwing refs under the bus is doing a disservice to the quality of the work that they do on a daily basis. The NBA, switching sports a little bit, we've seen a little bit of a mess and a bit of inconsistency with the NFL and their referees right now. I think the NBA does a really good job of getting their guys trained and getting them all ready to go. I think officiating crews, for the most part, are pretty consistent. And I hate to see them, or I hate to see the end of games now being focused on the refs every time. I think you need to let these guys do their jobs. And I'm not in the belief of publicly shaming people, which I think this has kind of turned into.
I like that, and I think you've definitely seen the support from players around the league, which is ironic in some ways, because in some ways you might feel okay, like they want to know, hey, that they were vindicated if a call was missed one way or the other. But I guess you're right; it definitely should be handled in a more private manner, with the league and those officials in that situation, making the report public. Again, while Adam Silver is trying to be, very forthcoming and have, a clear vision of what's going on within the league, you're right. It does put the eye on the microscope on these referees, and it does make for some poor media, conversation afterwards. Because we all knew that anyway. You know what I mean? And that really hurts these referees and their reputations. Like you said, it really can cause them to be a little bit more tentative, or maybe again more whistle happy, which nobody, like you said, wants to see. And I'm all for it, but I don't know if it's going to go away anytime soon. But Adam Silver is very great at listening, to the calls of his players and to the league itself in general. And I'm sure if it's something that people feel strongly enough about, then maybe he'll revisit it sometime in the offseason.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here because I agree with you guys with reference to what the impact of what the 2-minute report is doing right now, as far as us questioning the quality of the officiating of the refs. The thing that stands out to me more than anything is the fact that I just feel like it seems so one-sided because the person or the entity that is projecting this is the league, not necessarily the players. And I'd like to think that at some particular point, there is a unification that this is needed, because let's be realistic and let's be real and separate ourselves from the quote unquote cowspiracy theorists and conspiracy theorists about the fact that games are being impacted by non-calls or calls that should be made. I think that the idea and the purpose of this is so that these referees do try to show a propensity to get these calls right, to not make it inconsistent. So thereby, the 2-minute report I do think is important because in those 2 critical minutes, it's necessary, and you want to make sure that these referees are getting everything. And it's not a question of just perfection. I think it's more a question of consistency. The problem that I have is how it's being projected and the way that it's being disseminated to us, not just the fans, but also to the media. It gives more of a propensity to project scrutiny and criticism, and it's only directed to one entity, just being the rest, because ultimately that's where it's pointed towards. That's who is cognate. That's who we're looking at and who we're directing this to. To your point, Kevin, this to me is the problem with the NFL, because the only person that's speaking up about this is the executive VP that watches over this, not the referees, not that there is a collective assessment that everyone has come together and say, okay, we're going to get this right the next time, or we're going to do better by this. And I think that's where it faults. You're just putting it out there to say, hey, these guys got it wrong. And to your point, there's no level of resolution once this has now been pronounced, which to me contradicts the whole reasoning behind doing it. I think that they just need to take better steps in implementing what should ultimately be the reason why you're doing the report, is so that the referees, because everyone has their checks and balances. We have it on our own entity amongst podcasting, media, and everything like that. So I would expect the same thing. The fact that they want transparency to be there, it can't just stop at the fact that they're just looking at it and saying, okay, these guys got it wrong, let's move on. Like, to me, that it has to be more than that, simply because of the way that the game is being projected.
Well, I'll ask you guys the question, because this has, come around a little bit, and we've seen some GMs or reports out there that they want a full 48-minute report of all the calls that were made through the entire game. I mean, really taking this a step further. I get it. I'm all about transparency, but I feel like we're kind of going down a bit of a rabbit hole here with the 48-minute, report, and you're going to start to get, people scrutinizing it and basically making excuses, being like, oh, we didn't get this call here and that cost us 2 points and we didn't get this here. I mean, what do you guys think about that? I'm firmly in the no camp there. I agree with Cal's point. Like, I think the way it's presented doesn't help either. I could completely agree with that. They basically just give you the report and go, this is wrong, and that's it. And so, at the end of the day, what does that accomplish? But, I can't say I'm a fan of going down this 48-minute rabbit hole either.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's tough. And I mean, if they do it, I don't want it to be, I don't need to know about it. what it boils down to. I think you're always in search.
For cowspiracy theory, I need to know about it. I need my proof, bro. And for me to make these outlandish theories about things that are impacting the game of basketball, I need that stuff. I'm just playing.
But I mean, if they're going to go through and say, hey, at 7:46 in the first quarter, we missed a travel, or Richard Jefferson hand checked LeBron. I mean, like stuff like that. Like I don't know. Like I said, I think they can handle that internally. If you open up this whole thing, it's just gonna. The referees, I think, for me, the NBA referees are probably the most scrutinized of all officials in sports. I mean, NFL.
Oh yeah, especially after the Tim Donaghy situation.
Yeah. So like I don't know. You want to clean it up, but like I said, making it so public makes it detrimental at the same time.
Well, and again, not to belabor the point, because I think we do offer to very good perspectives from it. I'm not saying I disagree with you guys, because I feel like if this is what the outcome is going to be and then there's no positioning to improve upon it, then I don't think that it should happen at all. However, I think checks and balances are important. I think that there has been, we can go back and we can say there have been numerous situations and games where, because there has not been checks and balances, where referees kind of have gone unchecked with no one letting them know that they'd missed certain calls, and these calls did indirectly may have impacted the game, may have impacted the quality of the game. Enough could be said that there needs to be something in place to do that. And I think that that's something, whether it has to be done collectively bargained, whatever the case may be, it's eventually going to get itself to that point, because you just don't want hacks for referees. We've seen where this goes, where during strike situations, you bring in people who are not experienced to make the calls that need to be made. So I think that it is going to happen, and I think it's important. But how you disseminate that information and the purpose that it serves for us as the media and anyone else in using that information, because you can't control it. Once it gets out and spreads like wildfire, you run the risk of Pandora's box being open. But the ultimate goal is that if the intent is you want the referees to get it right, especially during critical stretches of basketball games, it's going to wind up being there. But how you project it to people, I think, is so important, because now all you're basically doing, to the point of Kevin Durant and LeBron James, is you're ultimately throwing people under the bus, specifically the refs. Kevin, what next up, man? What you got for your next resolution, bro?
All right, so my third one which is kind of fitting. I got 3 teams involved for this one, because a lot of teams.
A trifecta, man. I like it.
The trifecta. By the way, Cowspiracy Theory, can you like drop a funk flex bomb after every time you say that? Like that is just classic.
I will do my best. I will try to do my very best. I don't want to overuse it now, because you know what I'm saying? Because once the game gets saturated, man, 3 cuts in your eyebrows trying to wild out, and the next thing you know, I'm done. So, but I will make sure that when I do it, I will put that funk flex emphasis on it. No doubt.
Absolutely, my man. But so my final one, we got 3 teams involved, like I said, and it's specifically focusing on the Miami Heat, Dallas Mavericks, and the Phoenix Suns. We are in 2017. It is a new year. The beginning of 2016, not been ideal for this season for either of these teams. We got a really quality draft class coming up. And, as a process believer, I stand by this for other teams as well. Embrace the tank. These teams, Miami has reported this 10-23. We've got in the West, we're talking about the Mavericks also 10-23, Suns also 10-23. Minnesota's in this mix as well, but I don't want to include Minnesota because they're more personnel issues, but that's a talk for another day. But with Dallas, Phoenix, and Miami, you guys, there are some salvageable assets here. Specifically with Miami, we look at Goran Dragic, a guy who could potentially get a first rounder for. If you really want to get into it, there's some calls to trade Whiteside. I'm not quite on that bandwagon yet, but I've seen that before. And if you get some crazy offer that you can't refuse, I'm not exactly ruling it out here. You look at Dallas, you've got guys like Andrew Bogut, who you can definitely move, get some value for. Phoenix kind of the same way with Tyson Chandler, guys like Jared Dudley, PJ Tucker, who don't necessarily fit the timeline and are taking minutes away from guys who they would necessarily want to see get those minutes for in a loaded draft class. I'm saying for these 3 teams, start looking ahead to 2017, start looking ahead to the future, and just embrace the tank. I'm not saying go out and purposely throw games, but I'm saying see what you got. In the case of Phoenix, for example, Dragan Bender finally starting to get some playing time. I know Earl Watson has mentioned that he's going to get some playing time here, but for the most part, he at the beginning of the season wasn't getting anything at all. This is a guy you spent the number 4 overall pick on. I would like to see him get some more playing time, see what you got. In Miami, you got the young guards, Tyler Johnson. You want to see what Justice Winslow can do. So I think in this case, embrace it. See what you got with your young talent. Whatever you don't need going forward, whatever doesn't fit the timeline, get some value back and start putting these young cores together. We want to see these teams get competitive again.
I would love to hear you do this drop, man. Embrace the tank. I can see that, like, it just hollowing out and putting some serious effects on that, man. Might actually make people actually use that word, and it might not feel like a bad thing, especially for teams like the Philadelphia 76ers and the Dallas Mavericks,
It's been 3 years of embracing the tank, man. And I'll tell you what, I think if I didn't embrace the tank, they might have put me in a basketball asylum right now. So, it's tough. It's not, I told Tim Tompkins, because Tim Tompkins, my co-host, is a huge Suns fan. I told him, because he started to get frustrated a little bit. He's like, the Suns are badly coached and doing all this stuff. And I'm just like, Tim, like, you just got to step back a little bit. You gotta look at the end game here. Watch it when you need to. Take a few games off if need be. Like, it's going to be ugly. But, you got to look at the long run. If you set yourselves up with a young core, both of these teams have assets that they can build around. And in the case of Dallas, you have an owner in Mark Cuban who's willing to spend. So I think that helps. They can rebuild a little bit quick. And Dallas is a bit more interesting because, now that Darren Williams is getting healthy or is healthy again a bit, and, JJ Barea is back, hopefully you get Dirk back in the mix soon. They should get better, but realistically, if you maxed Harrison Barnes, you've chosen him as your guy. So, start to put the core around him that he needs to succeed. And I think that's certainly able to do. Mark Cuban's been a great owner for this team. In Phoenix, you got Bender, you got Booker, you got Marquise Chris, guys that you've spent picks on. TJ Warren's still in the mix. So you can go forward with talent there. Miami, and we mentioned a few of these guys earlier, even if you're rocking with Whiteside and keeping him, still a very young player, one of the more dynamic centers, really, stuffs that stat sheet every single night. So there's a lot to look forward to, but, if you're going to be bad, be all the way bad. Don't do this middle ground, 8 seed, try to win meaningless games type deal and hurt yourself for potential long-term success, which is the goal of everybody in the NBA.
I'll touch on, the Heat and the Suns real quick. The Mavs are, it's kind of an interesting situation. But for me, living in the South Florida area, they have no interest in tackling. Like, Riley he's a maniac. And he won't do it as long as he's running that organization. And you're right, they have assets in Dragic. Dragic wants to even stay in Miami. The whole Bosh, Wade, LeBron thing, that just really set the franchise back after winning those 2 titles. And the way they all left or, weren't able to stay with the organization for the various reasons, that really has put a damper on what's going on in Miami. And I don't know that they'll actually do it, but it would be interesting to see if Riley would suck it up and then maybe he'd step down and let this Heat usher themselves into a new generation. For Phoenix, it's a little weird for me because they're like not quite like Minnesota, but they have all this young talent already. So the veterans that they have, Tyson Chandler, PJ Tucker, would they trade them for more young talent? Are they trading them for picks? Because when those picks come in, are they better than what they have now and trying to develop Booker, Chris, and Bender? Like, for me, Phoenix is in a really weird, odd situation in trying to figure out how they can get better and what that's going to look like. So is it really like the long tank, if you will, like how, like you said, Philadelphia just did 3-4 years, where before they can actually see some results on what they're trying to do?
Yeah, look, it's interesting when my man Kev says embrace the tank. What I think to myself is, for some of these guys, embrace your teammates. Because if you guys are not up to snuff, you might actually wind up playing in the D League yourself and extending your professional careers, but not in the NBA. So, it's interesting because how we look at it, from an organizational perspective and how it looks to even the players' perspective. And even for coaches, I think that for some of these coaches, man, can they tolerate playing, with the kind of personnel that they have, trying to get them to compete at the level that they're seeing these other teams blowing them out by 30, 40 points? It's a tough sell, man. It really is. But for the fan and for us, the media people who are trying to cover this, and we're trying to swallow the pill and try to, we're trying to bring logic to something that may feel illogical. That's the best slogan I done heard for 2017 and moving forward. Embrace the tank. All right, Shaw.
I'm just telling you, man, it'll make, it's tough. It's hard, but you know what? And there's ways to do it where you don't need to totally just go out there and get blown out by 30 every night. Do it the right way. Experiment with different lineups. Play your young guys. I think there's value in getting that experience, and you may stumble across somebody. You never know. Guys like Robert Covington, for example, a guy who's in the D League, worked himself into a 4-year deal with the Sixers. You never know where you can find gems everywhere. And with the NBA now, especially, there is more talent out there in the general basketball community than there's probably ever been at any point in the history of Earth. So, take the time now, experiment. You don't need to necessarily go on the long tank. I'm not saying go full hinky and take 4 years off essentially, but still, there are ways to do it and not have it just be a total, disheartening mess. The
greatest executive vacation ever taken by an NBA analyst. I mean, he did the numbers right. Once he bounced from Houston and came over to Philly, I mean, you could not have called for a better executive vacay than to do what he did in the 4 years from Philly. It was awesome.
And
absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and it's just, it proved the fan base is still behind it. You still go to any Sixers games and you'll see a good 3 Hinkie died for my sins signs. So, it's all about that big long-term picture. And, hopefully most diehard fans people that are listening to podcasts, people who are watching every single night. I think they're smart enough, and there's enough information out there to understand the value in this now.
You tune to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA or 2017 New Year's resolutions with our special guest, Kevin Rafuse of the DriveAndDish Podcast. Be sure to check those guys out. Their Twitter handle, DriveAndDish Podcast. Shaw, what's up, man? Where's your New Year res, man? What's going on?
Well, I'm going to start and really probably just go with one for right now. And I think maybe I'll tweet out some of the rest of these. For me, I'm going to go with taking after Kevin's, moniker, if you will, and stay a little hometown, a little biased in terms of rooting for the Celtics. And I want them to either shit or get off the pot. I'm tired of hearing about them, that they were after all these guys, this guy, Paul George, Marcus Cousins, whoever it is, either do something or shut up at this point. Ride with what you have, develop that roster, and listening to other shows and things like that too, you just realize, okay, maybe the window to really compete in the Eastern Conference is maybe 2 years away. So, work with what you have right now. You have to pay these guys, and you want to try to continue to build that chemistry. But I don't want to hear that they're after this one and that one and this one and that one, and then nothing ever happens. A lot of those rumors are created by within their organization. You can say it's Ainge, you can say it's staffers or whatever the case may be. But at this point, like I said, shit or get off the pot. Stop talking about it.
Is this a family show? I forgot. Kevin, do you ever? I've never heard. I'm gonna use my man's terminology that he used last week. Onery. look, man. When you use Kevin, if you ever get the opportunity to use that word, man, you could use it with emphasis because I think it's one of the tightest words to throw out there. Onery. I've never heard Shaw this onery about a New Year's resolution in the 4 years that we've been trying to do this thing, bro.
I love it, man. I love the passion, and he's absolutely right. I mean, the thing with Boston is Danny Ainge finds a way to get into every single trade rumor of all time. And it is kind of at that point. I feel like we've been hearing for the past 2 or 3 seasons, Boston has all these assets, and it's been trying to land every single superstar ever. Marcus Cousins, John Wall, Paul George, any disgruntled superstar has been linked to Boston. And I agree. I mean, I think Danny Ainge needs to get to that point where, at some point, you just have to realize that you may not stumble upon a superstar. Things like the James Harden trade they're rare in today's NBA, and they are going to continue to be rare, especially with this new CBA in place that essentially incentivizes all these stars to stay where they are. So I think if you're Boston, you got a lot of great pieces. I think they're starting to click finally. I'm a little concerned about the 0-8 record against teams better than them, but they are beating everybody below them, which is all you can ask for. It seems that in the Eastern Conference that Boston and Charlotte are beginning to separate themselves a little bit from that logjam, kind of battling out for that 3 and 4 position, try to keep pace with both Toronto and Cleveland. At the same time, you have a great coach in Brad Stevens. I think it's pretty universally, believed that he's done a fantastic job so far in Boston. IT's been great since coming over to Boston from Phoenix. IT was one of those guys that I didn't buy into his game as much. You can't deny the results, but I was a little worried about how he was getting it done. He continues to just prove me wrong on a daily basis. A lot of talented, like we said, there's some issues there. The rebounding has got to get better. But at the same time, some solid guard play. I think Avery Bradley has continued to take steps. I'm not necessarily out the door on Marcus Smart yet, though it seems like he's a guy that you could get some value back for. But I'd love to see Boston go out and get a more rim protector, get somebody at the 5, because what the beauty of Horford is you can push Horford to the 4 and he'll stretch the floor and it won't, clog up your paint. You can make lineups work around that. And I have full faith in Brad Stevens to make lineups work around that. So go out and get that guy who's more of a traditional 5, who can rebound, who can do the dirty work inside the paint. I think that'll go a long way for the Celtics. But I mean, I agree. I think this, getting to the playoffs last year again was great for this team, being the 3 seed. I think they're going to be right back in the mix again. But at some point, with all of these assets and the high Brooklyn picks coming in, something's got to happen here. I mean, eventually you're just going to run out of roster spots.
Yeah, man. I completely agree with you, Kevin and Shaw. That is a great resolution to throw out there. Trust me. It's kind of interesting because the resolution that I had was for the Raptors to feel the rapture. Like, it's time for these dudes to finally step up and make us believe that they can run, with the Cavs. Right now, just basically looks like the Miami Heat in the land. That's all. That's what it feels like out there in Cleveland. And it would be just great to finally see somebody in this Eastern Conference. And I feel like the 2 closest teams that have the opportunity to do it, one more believable than the other, and they all reside out of the Atlantic Division, is either the Boston Celtics or the Toronto Raptors. So it'll be interesting to see, because the team with the most upside, if you really look at it from a roster perspective, is the Boston Celtics, because Danny Ainge has had so much to work with and has so much to work with yet and still. While the Toronto Raptors, Masai Ujiri just keep working with what he works with. So it'll be very interesting to see how this thing plays itself out. But my big New Year's resolution for 2017, I call this No Country for Old Men. Okay? These unfiltered comments from George Karl and Phil Jackson on the current state of the superstars in the NBA, in the league in itself, enough already. All right? Like, I get it. I don't besmirch any man who has done what guys like George Karl has done and the accomplishments of what Phil Jackson's done. Phil Jackson, 11 rings. George Karl, top 5 in wins all time as a head coach in the NBA. But seriously and honestly, if you think that giving your unfiltered opinion about every conceivable thing with reference to the state of the NBA is adding either credibility or more so adding a sense of justification to validate your experiences and the things that you went through as a head coach or as an executive or whatever the case may be, with very little means of solution or without pointing it in a direction where you are actually enlightening people about things that we haven't already, like, we already know about this stuff. What it says to me is you sound like bitter people who feel like you have an axe to grind about something that you're out of touch with. That's what it feels like. So when guys like George Karl, and listen, to the media, that's great, because all this is sound bites. It gives us reasons to have debates and topics, but now you're venturing into making comments about the upbringings of superstars and the entitlement of the things that they do. And yet these are the same superstars that are doing more philanthropic work. These are the same superstars that are continuing to build the brand of the NBA that we speak and market the NBA, even under some of the worst conditions prior to this new CBA agreement that's being dealt out. These guys are doing it and advancing the game. These type of things coming from the older generation does no service, not to just the fans, but also to the product and the brand of the NBA that Adam Silver is building and what David Stern had built when these guys won the championships and got all the W's that they got. No country for old men.
I have no problem with that. I think that's definitely a great slogan, and it's a great movie as well, too. George Karl specifically, he's gone on this kind of apologetic, tour since those comments came out initially about Carmelo and Kenyon Martin. Then he said something about Damian Lillard and Terry Stotts, who grew up under George Karl in terms of being a coach. He said, listen, don't talk about my players. You don't know my guys. And for Phil Jackson, again, he's always going to be that dude, man. He's always got some crap to say, something negative, and he always sees the things his way, and, don't think people are going to understand, the way that basketball should be played. But I think Karl, in some ways, it was really more about him trying to sell this book. I don't know if he really believes all the crap that was said and even written. I think it was something that's going to sell, and it's going to come out next month in January, and it's gonna hit. For people who want to hear this gossip. But he really did violate, I think, some of these players' trust and some of the things that are supposed to be private.
But he also violated a major code, Shaw. Look, when players often talk about things like, you listen to Chauncey Billups. Okay, you listen to Tracy McGrady. They'll talk to you about things that happened in the game, things that may have happened behind the scenes, but they don't go into divulging who those guys are and how they dealt with those guys and things of that nature. George Karl is blatantly taking things that have happened behind the scenes in the locker room in trust with these guys that he's supposed to be helping become not just better players, but better men, right? And he's basically airing it out in a book. So I don't know what justice it serves in doing that, but that's what it looks like. And I think that is part of one of the problems that exists now when older people start speaking about things. If they're not physically there on a consistent basis, it makes it seem like you have an axe to grind about something that you don't have any control over and you're not invested in. And that's what it feels like. I'm just giving my perspective from it because of the way that Kenyon Martin has responded, the way Damian Lillard has responded, and Carmelo Anthony has responded. They're not looking at George Karl as just a bitter person. They're looking at like, listen, man, you are somebody that we're supposed to listen to go out there and be better players for so that you can get these W's. And this is how you repay us back. This is how you repay those same players that I consider teammates back for. So that's what it feels like.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It was definitely shady in all aspects. And again, if it was done specifically to sell books, because he said something on Mike and Mike that kind of struck me. He's like, oh, well, I guess I should have, read things or, vetted it better. And I was like, well, aren't these your words? And I know he didn't write it verbatim and he had somebody help him with all that stuff like that. But for these things to come out and these extras to come out and say that he doesn't really know or he didn't know that was going to come out that way and some of it's taken out of context, that's BS. So, I mean, I don't know. Kevin, what's your thoughts on it, man?
Well, my thing is when you write stuff like that, I mean, first off, to me, you have to be pretty tone deaf to make inflammatory comments the way George Karl made and not assume these weren't going to go over well. I mean, you talk about Carmelo Anthony, he talks about his lack of a father. Carmelo Anthony's father died at 2 years old because of cancer. What are we saying there? What is the bigger point that you're trying to imply there? I think it's the implications which are problematic. And like you guys said, Phil Jackson, George Karl, these are NBA legends.
Exactly.
And it's sad to see them coming off. First off, the NBA I think is a pretty progressive league, especially in the with the four major American sports. I think the NBA does a really good job at that, and I think the NBA does a great job of honoring their legends. And these are guys that have so much wisdom, with Phil's 11 rings of George Karl, with all the wins he racked up over the years, who could just give so much. And instead, I think George Karl's are worse than Phil's. I'm not defending Phil, but I think George Karl is, like you guys said, it just seems bitter at this point. What are you trying to prove at this point? What are you trying to do? You're just going back and you're basically just shitting on these guys. For what? For what's the grand purpose here? And I think some of it is to sell books, but I think some of it too is to justify this in his own mind. But I think when you look at George Karl, at what point do you look at yourself? I mean, you look at all the Denver guys. You look at his time in Milwaukee, his time in Seattle, all successful stops. But even going to Sacramento, you always had kind of players talk about it a little bit. I know the big thing on Twitter that made waves over the summer was DeMarcus Cousins when he had the snake in the grass and all that stuff. But this has happened multiple times. At some point you got to call a spade here. And it's just it's sad to see because these are just, like we said, these are legends. These are guys that, you want to hear their insights to the game. And you want to hear all the positive that's happened over the years because there are a lot of great experiences. It's sad to see them bitter. I like when legends don't, and it kind of goes back to the point of, the my generation wasn't like this or my generation wasn't like this. Well, guess what? Every generation is different. Exactly. The game evolves every single year. The rules change, players change, attitudes change, things change. We all grow, we all evolve. I look at, the counter example that I've seen this year that I've really liked, and I brought this up on the podcast, is, all the talk with Russell Westbrook going for the triple-double this year has been, Oscar Robertson, he might break the record, it may finally happen. So, Big O was on ESPN, and all he did was just like, this is great, I hope it happens. All he did was pay respect, and he wasn't remotely upset about it. He was just, encouraging him, giving him on. You want to see positive support around like that. Basketball is a big community. These words go a long way, and I just think the comments from both of them this year have been tone deaf. They've been petty. They've been malicious. They've been implying all sorts of things that I just don't think are remotely true or have any basis in fact. And it's just sad. If my thing is basically at this point, if you don't have anything nice to say, I think we all were brought up this way. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. If you believe this way, don't publish it out there. What do you get out of slandering J.R. Smith and Carmelo Anthony and Kenyon Martin at this point? Like, do you pat yourself on the back? Do you get some extra satisfaction? Do you get an extra hour of sleep at night? Like, I just don't understand the reasoning at this point.
Man, you couldn't have ended it so like on point. I mean, lovely, Kevin. If you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say it at all. But, again, man, this is the bravado by which these guys grew up in order to make their name, to kind of stake their claim and also make their name. And I take nothing from the accomplishments, again, from what George Karl has done, from what Phil Jackson has done. But I will say that if they don't think that their words and the way that they're approaching how they're speaking out about what they feel and their perspective about what they see in reference to the game doesn't have consequences that can be detrimental. Like, for example, George Karl talking about, oh, I would love to coach again. I don't know anybody in the NBA right now, executive, owner, or any franchise that is looking at this book, even the comments that have been made publicly by George Karl, with any reason to say that he would be a viable head coach, let alone assistant coach, let alone talent scout for their organization, simply because the way that he comes across seems to be someone that has an axe to grind or bitter fruit. And you're trying to develop players to eventually win championships, which is something left to be said, because on that resume that George Karl so ignorantly has, the reason for his soapbox is something that he doesn't have, is an NBA championship. Kevin, man, I can't tell you how awesome it is to have you back in the fold, man. I'm thinking, man, we might need to start talking about doing some trades, man. You know what I'm saying? Maybe we're gonna need to negotiate with something with Tim and try to do a trade. I'm thinking about, you know, doing a trade, the drive and dish with the Baseline NBA podcast, man.
I would hate to break up a happy home. I definitely feel like, but the conversation that we had earlier in terms of making sure that we can kind of have some of our panel discussions and, you know, under the underworkings, you know, behind the scenes of the podcast production scenes, we had some conversations about maybe trying to do something preseason, but I think we can definitely do that. Maybe even as far as the playoffs, maybe we can, you know, get together and, you know, do a combined show. We both promote it. We'll see. But, you know, it's always a fun time to have Kevin on. Obviously, Tim as well too. We need to get Justin on this thing as well too. Great guys, great shows. Make sure you guys are tuned in, man, because this is basketball talk at its finest, man.
Well, we appreciate you guys having us. And like I said at the beginning of the show, all the support you guys provided over the years. You know, when we started this podcast, you know, 3 years ago almost now, we didn't really know what it would look like. We didn't know if we'd even get a fan base. And, you know, you two guys were some of the first people to believe in our vision. We love the Baseline. You guys have been among our inspirations as well. We are still avid listeners. You guys are in my Serato of podcasts all the time, all basketball podcasts. We're always keeping in touch on you guys. You know, you guys are family. We got to do, whether it's All-Star break, playoffs, but, you know, Shaw, Cal, from me, Tim, and Justin, you know, it's love every single time.
Well, Kevin, man, once again, we completely appreciate the love, man. We were so happy that you guys are continually to move on up that ladder, man, because we see nothing but the best from you guys, and we're inspired by you guys as well, too, and that's how we do, man. The one and only, the enigmatic, he is that dude running and wild with my boys out there with Tim and Justin. Be sure to check these guys out. The Drive and Dish Podcast, the Twitter handle at Drive and Dish NBA. Kevin's Twitter handle at Rafuse to Lose. Kevin, brother, man, we appreciate everything. Thanks for jumping on board with us, and can't wait to get you back on this show, man. 2017, we're going to ride dirty for the rest of this season, man.
It's going to be a fun year, man, and we're looking forward to the playoffs. It's, you know, Cal, Shaw, always a pleasure. Happy New Year's, all that. Happy Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah. We're getting all of them out right away. You know, it's 2017. It's going to be a fun year for everybody, and you know, like we said, we got to get this roundtable cracking, man. The people are going to be asking for it after this podcast. We can't let them down. Definitely,
man. You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week, we rolling them out, man. We just can't be stopped, man. This is one of the great reasons to enter 2017. The podcast is just rolling lovely. We have with us another special guest on board with us. He is the managing editor for ESPN's True Hoop. Cowbell Kingdom, covers the Sacramento Kings. Been doing it lovely for a minute. Our man, Leo Beas. Leo, thank you for joining us this week to talk Kings basketball, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Warren.
So, my man, Leo, listen, you know, I think we became fast friends, you know, on Twitter and like that too, seeing some of the work that you guys have done, you know, this season. And first time having you on the show. And I guess you know why. A lot of rumors, a lot of news coming out of the Sacramento area, man. And I'm watching the video of the Sacramento Bee, and I'm like, is that my dude Leo being hunted down by my man DMC? And I don't know how much you've listened to our show, Leo, because I'm a big Cousins fan. I just think his talent is unbelievable, and I know there's a lot in the community. But give us, you know, what you can from that situation in that of itself. You know, what is the temperament of Cousins and his relationship with the city and the organization and the media respectively? Because again, like I said, I hated to see him go at you like that, man. You stood your ground because that's a big dude, but it was a wild thing to watch, man. So just give us a little background on what's going on in Sac, though, bro.
Well, first and foremost, DeMarcus Cousins is a very good person, a great member of this community. Honestly, I believe that he is the most generous player in the NBA. With that being said, everyone has, some things they have to fix and within themselves. And DeMarcus Cousins, he tends to be in the headline sometimes for the wrong reasons, because he gets mad at a ref because he doesn't get a call, or things happen. Obviously, he wasn't happy with Andy Ferrello of the Sacramento Bee because he mentioned his brother in his column, which honestly, it's really up to the individual to decide if that was right or wrong. I don't think it was needed, me personally, but again, that wasn't the way to handle that situation. DeMarcus could have handled it a lot better. He didn't. There isn't much debate about that. You don't go up to a 5'7", 60-year-old and pretty much intimidate the guy. And what he did to me, obviously, was not the right thing either. And, again, there are better ways of handling situations. He's a professional. It's unfortunate how it all happened. And, he did not agree with the story that we ran. It was concerning his technical fouls and how that hurts the team. How per 36 minutes he gets better statistically speaking, but again, it doesn't take into account that you give up a point, possibly 2 or 3 points within that same possession. And if he didn't agree with that, well, I can't help him there, And we're journalists and we have to run things that are objective. And I cover this team on the floor. Again, I don't ever talk about his brother or his family because I don't really care about that. That's not my job. My job is to cover him on the court. And obviously he didn't like the story. He went after me, and it wasn't pleasant. But hopefully, I'm just trying to move forward. He's trying to move forward, and hopefully this is just I just want to move on. It wasn't cool, but at the same time, we all make mistakes, man.
Leo, and I want to be sure to kind of put a stamp on this. There has not been any communication with Boogie Cousins and with you since that is.
He hasn't reached out to me. He hasn't pulled me aside or apologized to me personally. Again, I'm not trying to be the story. I've been very vocal about this. I write about the story, and it is what it is. If he apologizes, great. I'll gladly accept it. If he doesn't, just move on, man. I mean, basketball is what we love. We both love the game. That's why we do this,
Well, and let me interject, and I guess kind of maybe somewhat off the court, if you will, but again, we don't want to, because we're not here to bash Boogie. As I said, I'm a huge fan of the guy. I think he's the best big in the game, and again, I know what he's done in the game.
Absolutely, he is.
As you said as well too. But what about these rumors, or what can you tell us and tell our listeners about these rumors that, in terms of his relationship with the organization and with certain people, even outside of the media, are those rumors true, or is it people just kind of piling on, to certain incidents and really trying to paint him in a more negative light than he's already portrayed himself in to some degree?
Well, I'll say this: the organization has enabled him to do what he has wanted for the past 7 years, which is why he acts the way he does with certain members of the media. And obviously, if he doesn't like you, he's going to pretty much try to embarrass you. And that's not the way to go about it. They pretty much just slapped him on the wrist. I know $50,000 is a lot of money to us, to the average Joe, to the average American. But in the grand scheme of things, he makes $206,000 a game, and he still made $150,000 that game. So to me, I believe a suspension was needed. Again, last year he went off on Carl, nothing happened, and again, he has the green light to do what he wants. And I know the organization is trying to fix that, which I know they are, and I've been told this. But again, it's a work in progress, and they need to stop enabling them.
Leo, let me ask you a question, because it's kind of interesting how all of this now is really coming out in the forefront. And this is obviously just now after George Karl releases, quote unquote, his Furious George book that's expected to be released in January. What is this? What is the air like right now in Sacramento? I feel like this is more than just about a basketball team dealing with a superstar athlete. I feel like that now there is there's something growing in the air. Maybe, I'm someone from the outside looking in, so I'm asking someone who's right knee deep in the middle of it. What is it like right now in the trenches? The Sacramento Kings team is still sitting around in the 8th seed of the Western Conference, and yet we don't know how stable that really feels like and seems, just because at any given moment, something can drop from out of nowhere in the middle of that quote unquote core and nucleus and just let this thing explode like wildfire all over again.
Well, to be fair, the bottom 8 after the Kings, with the 8th seed and under, all these teams are just bad teams, and that's me being honest. One of these bad teams will make the 8th seed, and if it happens to be the Kings, then it happens to be the Kings.
So there's no like rah. There ain't gonna be no people are not gonna feel all great about that.
No, again, trust me, or believe me, if the Kings make the 8th seed, that's a great accomplishment, and they'll probably get beat 4-1 against the Warriors. But again, it's going to be great to have the NorCal rivalry in the first round, having these games back in Sacramento, which would be a great accomplishment. But honestly, I looked at the BPI, and if they make it, they're on pace for 35 wins. And if a 35-win team makes it as the 8th seed, that's pretty sad. So again, all these teams are pretty much there. The Nuggets, the Blazers, which they play no defense at all. You have all these other teams in the bottom tier of the Western Conference that they're pretty much even. And one of these teams will make the 8th seed, and the Kings might be one of these teams. So we don't know. But again, I don't think Rudy Gay will stay on the team. I think he will get dealt. To who? We don't know yet. I've heard Oklahoma, the Thunder have showed the most interest in him. I don't know what they're willing to give up, to be honest with you. So it's going to be an interesting 2 months, man.
And I think, that's a great point, even to what CL was saying a little bit earlier on, too, in terms of, anything can drop at any moment. And now, as we're recording, seeing reports that Kosta Koufos might be on the block as well, and with some interest in him.
Koufos is a very good player, by the way, which is why the Rockets want him.
Yeah, and that it makes sense. So I guess my question is, I can't see them trading DeMarcus this season at all, unless something dropping.
No, I've been very vocal about this. I honestly believe he's going to extend, probably 5 years, $200 million. It's a business move for him. So because the Kings can pay him the most money out of all the teams, so I think he's going to extend this year. And then, but again, just because he extends does not mean he won't trade him next year. That makes sense. Right. And there's a big misconception there. Just because he extends does not mean he's going to stay here long term. It just means that it makes sense for him financially. And I think that's a huge possibility of him extending his contract this year. And if it doesn't work out this year and they don't make the playoffs, then yeah, I believe he'll get traded next year.
So, but I guess then my question is, what do they need? Obviously, Cousins is the centerpiece. If they trade Gay, if they trade Koufos, what is it that this team needs?
They need a star point guard, and they won't get him in free agency. They have to draft him. They've missed on so many players in the draft. They brought back C.J. McCollum twice, and it just happened that McLemore fell to them at 7, which they were kind of forced to take him because obviously he was a great talent. He was supposed to go 1 or 2 that year, and but they were going to take C.J. McCollum. I know for a fact, and it just didn't go that way. Obviously, they passed up on Damian Lillard as well. They've passed up on a lot of point guards. So, again, a team like Sacramento, and in the market that we're in, they have to draft a star point guard. And this bad luck of drafting all these busts, it's bound to end, right? I mean, it ended for the Raiders, so I hope it ends for the Kings.
Managing editor of ESPN's True Hoop, Cowbell Kingdom, Leo Beas, joining us here on the Baseline. Be sure to check him out on Twitter, Beas Leo. So, Leo, let's try and stay within. I want to try and stay within the here and now, realistically, because of the fact that the Kings have been playing good basketball, right? And I understand this team is not they're not going to be competitive enough to deal with any of the top 3 teams. But I guess for me, when you think about this Sacramento Kings fan base and the Sacramento Kings in itself, I mean, it's been tough, right? I mean, with the team possibly getting moved some years ago, then they finally keep the team where they are. Is there not anything good that could come from this Sacramento Kings team showing that they can be a competitive basketball team, or is the demand more? I guess in some ways, is that partly where and why there may be some of that divisiveness that tends to happen at times when the media starts talking about some of the athletes and because of the shortcomings that this team has not been successful over the years?
It's a real thin line, though. I've been saying this, the Kings are stuck in NBA purgatory because DeMarcus Cousins is at the piece is in the middle of all of this. He will not allow this team to be one of the top 3 worst teams in the game. And honestly, they're not good enough to be, not this year, but in previous years, good enough to be a top 8 team in the West. So they're stuck in the middle, which is the worst part, which is the worst place to be in. And, it's unfortunate. But again, they either have to decide, you know what, I'm going to sign better players, or I'm going to really go after these better players, or I have to draft well. And again, I don't think DeMarcus is a big incentive for other players to come play with him because he hasn't proven anything. Like, this team hasn't won 35 games in his tenure as a King. So to me, if I'm a big-time free agent, why would I come play with him, So again, they have to draft well. They can't continue to draft busts. And that's where the Kings lie right now. It's hard because if they trade Rudy Gay and they get draft picks, what is that telling the fans? They're saying, we might be looking to the future. Again, they have to have a plan and really decide, are we going to keep DeMarcus Cousins, or are we going to build around him, or are we going to give him up and just get future assets, which Boston has many of those.
So my question, and again, way to shout out the Celtics there because we're Celtics guys on this show. But nevertheless, looking at this team, they are not in the top 10 in pretty much any statistical category. They couple things where they get 14th, 15th, whatever like that. Pretty much still, late teens and lower third of the league itself. My question for you now is, do you think Jaeger's helped enough? Maybe he hasn't had enough time yet, obviously, but, do you think he's helped enough, or will he get there this upcoming season to really kind of make them take that next step? And then also, can this team be a destination for free agents? And is Cousins the reason why it's not right now? Because you're saying they need to draft somebody, but can they go out and get somebody with Jaeger kind of maybe leading the charge as a recruiter?
Well, Jaeger's done an okay job so far. He hasn't had the best talent to work with. He did say that it would take a year and a half of a process to get him where he wants him to get him. So he's been very honest about it. He didn't say, I'm going to make the playoffs in my first year. He said this process might take a year and a half to 2 years. And I know he has the backup of the ownership, which is always good, which is something that every head coach that has walked through here hasn't had. So, Jaeger has that. He has the backing of Vlade Divac, which is good, and Vlade has the backing of Avegra Dive. So how has he done? I think he's done okay. I'm not going to say he's not overachieving, but again, he's been reluctant to play. Honestly, my biggest criticism of him has been the fact that he continues to play Ben McLemore. Now, I don't know if they're trying to showcase this guy, but Ben McLemore is who he is. He's at best a top 10th man off any team, really, and he has no business starting every game. So again, you have a guy like Malachi Richardson, who is a rookie, who's been tearing it up in the D League. Again, it's the D League, but they're running the same high post offense in Reno, so he's familiar with the offense, and he's a guy who has extreme confidence in his jump shot, who's just a smooth player. And at this point, McLemore is not that much better, if at all, than Malachi, which is why I don't get why he continues to play this guy, which continues to shoot below 32%, who just gets lost on defense. And again, I can go on and on and on. And Aflalo has been a huge disappointment. He is also shooting below 33% from beyond the arc. And again, the best player that they signed has been Garrett Temple. He's been great. You know, I don't think he's been surprised because I watched him play the last 5 years in Washington, and I knew he was a good player. It was just a matter of him getting more playing time, and he's been very good, very versatile. He's a great defender, and yeah, I'm really happy to see that. As far as about DeMarcus Cousins, he doesn't have that resume of saying, "Hey, dude, come play with me so we can take this to the next level." He's never won 35 games. The most he's won has been 33. So I don't believe it unless this year they make the playoffs and they win at least 40 games. Then players might want to come play with him.
So before I let you get out of here, just a couple quick notes. You mentioned a lot of these guys, and in terms of people that you may want to see gone and who aren't helping. But what are your thoughts on the backcourt situation? Obviously with Ty Lawson, Darren Collison, and what about Trill, man? Does Trill need to get some more minutes out there? Willie Cauley-Stein, what's going on with his situation in Sacramento?
He's been awful, honestly. He's taken a huge step backwards this year. I have no idea who advised him to work on jump shot. Not who he is. He's not even doing the things that they drafted him, which is to play defense, grab rebounds, and just be that defensive anchor. He's not even doing that right, which is a huge step backwards. Honestly, he should have worked on his strength. He's 23 years old, same age as Anthony Davis, and if you see him side by side, Anthony Davis has gotten so much stronger, which is something that Willie should have done. He didn't, and he gets bounced around in the paint by the bigger guys. I watched a lot of film, man, and it's sad because he gets pushed around 7 feet tall, and he needs to gain a lot of muscle weight so he can bang with these bigger dudes. His offensive game is forced. Like when you watch him play, everything about him is forced. He needs to do the things that Tyson Chandler did early in his career. Just block shots, be that anchor, and just play that role. And right now he's lost. Like he doesn't know what his role is. And as far as the backcourt, Ty Lawson has been playing a lot better lately, and Collison has digressed, which you want both of them to be clicking at the same time. And right now, it's either one guy or the other. So that's the inconsistency that we have with the Kings, and they're both free agents after this year. So it'll be very interesting to see how they continue to play.
He is the man. Definitely catch him on Cowbell Kingdom. He's also managing editor for ESPN's True Hoop. Leo Beas. Leo, man, we so much appreciate you hopping on board with us this week to talk not just Kings basketball, but also let us know that you're still alive and breathing, brother. I know we didn't get an opportunity to send send Conor McGregor over there to show you how to get that little upper hook going, but we know that you can hold your own out there and stuff like that. Don't let the boogie intimidate you, brother. Don't let him intimidate you.
I didn't plan too much, man.
Watch the video, guys. Man, he's still tall, as they say in the hood.
I'm from Stockton, man. Like I'm from Stockton. We don't fear nothing. Make deals, man.
Most definitely, Mr. Shaw. What a hell of a show that we brought forth, man. And I gotta tell you, man. You must be turning over a new leaf in 2017, bro. I mean, you dropping the S-bombs already. I mean, are we gonna have to PC our show now moving forward?
No, I don't think we're gonna get that R rating or anything like that too, the mature rating on iTunes or Google or anything like that too, man. But I mean, what other way to discuss, some of the things, the buffoonery that happens in the NBA sometimes. Sometimes you just gotta go out there and let the curses fly. And we'll keep, a little shit here and there isn't too bad. But nevertheless, man, I definitely enjoyed this show. 2017, we're off to an amazing start. Two just immensely talented and insightful guests to kick it off, Kevin and Leo. Those guys just know their stuff, man. It was so great to have them come on. And Kevin has one of the nicest voices, I think, in podcasting I've heard. Guy's so sultry, you know what I mean? Real silky smooth when he talks.
Are you expressing a podcast crush for Kevin Rafuse?
That's my dude. That's the homie. That's the homie right there.
All right, as long as because especially since we talked Boogie Cousins extensively, I didn't want you to get, it's not even Valentine's Day yet, bro. We still got a month away from that. So I just want to reserve some of your crushes until we get a little bit closer to that time frame, man. We
got to reverse get on that whole. Okay, scratch all of that. Wipe the record clean. None of that's going on here. Those are my dudes, but not my dudes.
Most definitely. So we appreciate you and yours once again for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline NBA podcast. Cali, Warren Shaw, we love you guys. We can't wait to kick it with you again. So until then, We'll catch up with you next time.